Viewing his arranged marriage as nothing more than a business transaction, the Duke of Westmore hadn't even bothered to look at the portrait of Lady Celeste, a supposedly plain spinster tucked away in the country. Yet, the moment the church doors swung open on their wedding day, 400 aristocrats let out a collective gasp that would echo through history. London, 1885. The season was in full swing, but Alfred Huntington, the 9th Duke of Westmore, had no interest in the waltzing debutantes of Mayfair. At 28, Alfred was notoriously ruthless, immensely wealthy, and notoriously cynical regarding matters of the heart. His lineage was impeccable, his estates vast, but a disastrously mismanaged generation prior had left the Westmore titles rich in land and perilously short on liquid capital. The solution, orchestrated by his ruthlessly pragmatic mother, the Dowager Duchess, was as ancient as the aristocracy itself, an arranged marriage. The target was the Harrington family. Charles Harrington, the Earl of Linwood, possessed a fortune built on maritime trade and steel new money, relatively speaking, but staggering in its volume. What Lord Linwood lacked was the unimpeachable social pedigree that only a dukedom could bestow upon his bloodline. The contract was signed in the mahogany-paneled library of the Westmore estate. Alfred barely glanced at the parchment before dragging his signet ring across the hot wax. "You haven't even inquired about the girl," Alfred, his closest confidant, Lord Henry Cavendish, remarked later that evening at White's Club, swirling a snifter of brandy. "What is there to inquire about?" Alfred replied, his voice laced with bored disdain. "Her name is Lady Celeste. She is 23, practically a spinster by society's standards, and she has been hidden away in Yorkshire for the entirety of her life. She brings £200,000 in liquid sterling and the deeds to the Newcastle foundries. That is all the biography I require." The rumors surrounding Lady Celeste were, in fact, the stuff of vicious parlor gossip. She was dubbed the Yorkshire Ghost. High society whispered that there was a reason the Earl of Linwood had never presented his daughter at court. Some claimed she had been ravaged by smallpox in her youth, leaving her terribly scarred. Others insisted she was afflicted with a nervous disposition, prone to fits, or simply too dull-witted and plain to secure a match on her own merits. Alfred did not care if she had two heads. He had an estate to save, and, privately, he had the company of Lady Genevieve Sterling, a dazzling, fiery widow who understood the rules of aristocratic discretion perfectly. Genevieve provided the passion. Celeste would provide the funds, and, eventually, an heir. For the 6 months leading up to the wedding, Alfred's neglect of his betrothed bordered on cruelty. Protocol dictated a courtship. However brief, Alfred provided none. When Celeste's mother sent a miniature oil portrait of the bride to his London townhouse, Alfred left it wrapped in its brown paper, shoving it into the bottom drawer of his desk. When Celeste wrote him a tentative, formal letter of introduction, the crisp vellum smelling faintly of dried lavender, Alfred broke the seal, glanced at the neat, sloping cursive, and tossed it into the fireplace. He instructed his secretary to send a standardized, typed reply acknowledging receipt. He did not visit Yorkshire. He did not attend the mandatory betrothal ball hosted by the Linwoods in London, citing a sudden, severe bout of gout. A blatant lie, as he was spotted writing in Hyde Park the very next morning. The ultimate insult came a month before the wedding. The bride's family had traveled to London for the fittings and the reading of the banns. A dinner was arranged at the Linwood estate on Park Lane. Alfred arrived 3 hours late, heavily intoxicated, and spent the entire 20 minutes he was present conversing exclusively with Lord Linwood about the steel tariffs, actively keeping his back turned to the corner of the drawing room where his bride supposedly sat. He left without ever laying eyes on her. "You are playing a dangerous game," Henry warned him the night before the wedding, watching Alfred confidently adjust his cravat in the mirror. "She will be your duchess. You will have to share a table, a roof, and a bed with the woman. Humiliating her before the vows are even spoken is poor strategy." "She is a Harrington," Alfred scoffed. "She is purchasing a coronet. Do not romanticize a business transaction Henry. She knows exactly what she is buying, and I know exactly what I am selling. I expect her to reside quietly at the country estate while I remain in London. We shall tolerate each other twice a year. It is the way of our world." Alfred went to sleep that night, completely, entirely unbothered, utterly confident that his life would remain unchanged, save for the sudden influx of desperately needed capital. He had no inkling that the woman he had spent half a year casually destroying in the eyes of society was about to bring him to his knees. The morning of May 14th was violently bright, the kind of crisp, brilliant London day that demanded attention. St. George's, Hanover Square, was packed to its gilded rafters. Over 400 guests crammed into the polished wooden pews. The atmosphere was not one of joyous celebration, but of ravenous curiosity. The elite of London had turned out in droves to witness the sacrifice of the handsome, arrogant Duke of Westmore to the tragic Yorkshire ghost. Fans fluttered rapidly in the warm air, concealing vicious whispers. "I heard her veil is to be heavily embroidered to hide the pox scars," whispered the Duchess of Richmond to her neighbor. "Genevieve Sterling is sitting in the third row, bold as brass," murmured another. "Poor plain Celeste won't stand a chance." At the altar, Alfred stood with the rigid posture of a soldier facing a firing squad. He wore a brilliantly tailored black morning coat and a silver waistcoat, looking every inch the devastatingly handsome aristocrat. He checked his pocket watch. 2 minutes past the hour. "Try to look slightly less like you are attending a funeral," Henry whispered from his position as best man. Alfred's jaw tightened. "Just pray the organist plays quickly. I have a meeting with the foundry managers at 4. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the vestibule slammed shut, silencing the restless murmur of the crowd. The massive pipe organ roared to life, vibrating through the stone floors. The congregation rose as one, turning their heads toward the entrance. The doors swung open. There was a profound, suffocating silence. It lasted only a second before a collective, visceral gasp ripped through the cavernous church. It wasn't a polite murmur. It was a physical shock of expelled breath from 400 people. Even the stoic Henry Cavendish let out a soft, stunned oath. Alfred, who had been staring at the altar cross, finally turned his head. His breath hitched in his throat, and the world tilted violently on its axis. Walking down the aisle on the arm of Lord Linwood was not a scarred, frail spinster. It was a goddess forged in silk and vengeance. Lady Celeste Harrington was, without a shadow of a doubt, the most devastatingly beautiful woman Alfred had ever seen in his life. She did not wear the traditional demure white. Her gown was a breathtaking creation of rich, deep ivory silk overlaid with heavy antique gold lace that seemed to catch the sunlight and burn with it. It hugged the spectacular, dangerous curves of her figure before flaring into a massive, sweeping train. But it was not the dress that paralyzed the room. It was the woman wearing it. Celeste was tall and carried herself with the lethal, predatory grace of a queen ascending a contested throne. Her skin was flawless, resembling warm alabaster. Her hair, which society had guessed would be mousy and thin, was a glorious, thick mass of dark auburn, pinned up in intricate braids, but left loose enough to frame a face that belonged on a Renaissance canvas. High, aristocratic cheekbones, a strong, proud jaw, and lips painted a deep, rebellious crimson. But her eyes were the true weapon. As she walked down the aisle, completely ignoring the stunned, gaping faces of the ton, she locked eyes with Alfred. Her eyes were a piercing, stormy gray, and they were filled with a cold, terrifying intellect and an ocean of utter contempt. Alfred felt the blood drain from his face. His heart slammed against his ribs with the force of a battering ram. The miniature portrait in his desk drawer, the one he had never unwrapped, the letters he had burned, the dinners he had skipped. A sudden, crushing wave of realization crashed over him. The rumors were a lie. A carefully constructed, perfectly maintained shield designed by Lord Linwood to keep fortune hunters and royal predators away from his brilliant, fiercely independent daughter until a match of absolute, supreme power could be secured. And Alfred, in his staggering arrogance, had treated her like dirt on his riding boots. As Celeste drew closer, Alfred could see the details, the pulse beating steadily at the base of her elegant throat, the diamond tiara woven into her auburn hair, flashing like warning beacons. She reached the altar. Lord Linwood handed her over, his face an unreadable mask, though his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a trap snapping shut. Alfred opened his mouth to speak, to offer some inadequate gesture, but his voice failed him. He extended his hand. Celeste did not take it immediately. She let him stand there, his hand suspended in the air, the silence in the church stretching until it became agonizing. The entire aristocracy watched the Duke of Westmore sweat. Finally, with excruciating slowness, she placed her gloved hand in his. Her touch was icy. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ceremony, his voice trembling slightly from the sheer tension radiating from the couple. Alfred repeated his vows mechanically, his mind racing, his eyes entirely unable to leave her face. He noted the way she held her chin, the absolute stillness of her posture. She was magnificent, and she hated him. When it was her turn, Celeste did not whisper. Her voice rang out clear, carrying a rich, velvety timbre that echoed off the stone pillars. "I, Celeste, take thee, Alfred." As the Archbishop instructed him to place the ring on her finger, Alfred leaned in slightly, the scent of her jasmine, and something sharp, like ozone before a storm filling his senses. You are breathtaking," Alfred breathed, the words escaping him involuntarily, a desperate, frantic attempt to bridge the chasm he had dug with his own hands. Celeste did not look up at him. She stared straight ahead at the altar cross. As he slid the heavy gold band onto her finger, she leaned in just a fraction of an inch. Her lips barely moved, her voice a lethal whisper meant only for his ears. "And you, Your Grace," she murmured, her tone dripping with absolute ice, "are exactly the arrogant fool I was warned about. Enjoy the money. You will have nothing else from me." Alfred recoiled as if he had been struck. The Archbishop pronounced them man and wife. As they turned to face the congregation, the new Duchess of Westmore offered the crowd a devastating, radiant smile. Alfred stood beside her, utterly shattered, realizing with terrifying clarity that the war for his pride, his household, and his heart had only just begun. The carriage ride from St. George's to the Westmore townhouse on Grosvenor Square was a masterclass in suffocating silence. Alfred sat opposite his new bride, the rhythmic clopping of the horse's hooves, mocking the rapid, erratic beating of his own heart. Celeste looked out the window, her profile a sharp, beautiful cameo against the velvet squabs. She did not fidget. She did not weep. She merely existed in a state of absolute, untouchable sovereignty. "Celeste," Alfred finally began, his voice hoarse, "I realize that my conduct over the past 6 months has been less than exemplary." "Less than exemplary?" She did not turn her head. A fascinating choice of words. "Your Grace." "I would have chosen abhorrent, or perhaps cowardly. But then, my education in Yorkshire was remarkably thorough. You were led to believe I was a monstrous, dim-witted creature to be hidden away," she interrupted, finally turning those stormy gray eyes upon him. The sheer force of her intellect pinned him to the seat. "And rather than verify this for yourself, rather than show a shred of common decency to the woman whose fortune was saving your ancestral home from the auction block, you chose to humiliate me before the entirety of London. You burned my letters. You ignored my family. You paraded your mistress, Lady Genevieve, in the parks where my mother and I rode." Alfred flinched. He had no defense. None. "My father," Celeste continued, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register, "wished for me to wear a veil. He wished to protect me from the vicious gossip of the ton until the ring was on my finger. But I refused. I wanted you to see exactly what you threw away. I wanted you to look at me at the altar and know the precise measure of your own foolishness." The carriage lurched to a halt before the grand columns of Westmore House. As the footman opened the door, Celeste leaned forward, the scent of jasmine washing over him again. "Welcome to our marriage, Alfred. You have secured your coronet. Now you shall learn the cost." The cost became horrifyingly apparent within 48 hours. Alfred had assumed that, upon the signing of the marriage registry, the £200,000 of Linwood sterling would be transferred into his personal accounts at Coutts & Co. He had debts to settle tailors, gambling markers at White's Club, and the exorbitant lease on the Mayfair townhouse he rented for Genevieve. He awoke on his second day as a married man to find his fiercely loyal, albeit deeply intimidated, solicitor waiting in his private study. "Your Grace," the solicitor stammered, adjusting his spectacles, "I have reviewed the final marriage settlements drafted by Lord Linwood's legal team. There is a stipulation." Alfred, nursing a severe headache and a glass of brandy, scowled. "What stipulation?" "I signed the papers. The money is mine. The principal of the estate, yes. The lands, the foundries, the deeds, they are now under the Westmore name," the solicitor explained, sweating profusely. "However, the liquid capital, the £200,000, it was placed into a blind trust." "A trust managed by whom?" Alfred demanded, slamming his glass down. "Managed jointly by Coutts & Co. and Her Grace, the Duchess. You cannot draw a single pound for personal, non-estate expenses without her dual signature." Alfred stared at the man, the blood draining from his face. He had been outmaneuvered. Lord Linwood had not just bought a dukedom for his daughter. He had installed her as its absolute dictator. Alfred was effectively on an allowance, doled out by a wife who despised him. Furious, humiliated, and desperate, Alfred made the worst possible decision. He ordered his horse and rode straight to the townhouse of Lady Genevieve Sterling. He needed solace. He needed the fiery, adoring widow who always stroked his ego and told him he was the master of his universe. He found Genevieve in her parlor, supervising the packing of several large steamer trunks. She looked up as he burst in, her beautiful face arranging itself into a mask of cool, polite surprise. "Alfred, darling, I wasn't expecting you, especially not 2 days after your nuptials. How is the Yorkshire ghost?" she purred, though her eyes were calculating. "Genevieve, what is all this?" he asked, gesturing to the trunks. "I am departing for Paris. Lord Hastings has invited me to join his party on the continent for the summer," she said smoothly, snapping a fan open. Alfred blinked. Lord Hastings was a marquis, 20 years older than Alfred, possessing a notoriously foul temper, but extraordinarily liquid in his assets. Hastings? But, "Genevieve, I am here. The marriage is a sham. It means nothing. We can continue as we were." Genevieve offered a small, pitying laugh. It cut Alfred deeper than a knife. "Oh, Alfred, word travels fast in Mayfair. My banker at Coutts informed me this morning of the peculiar arrangement of your new finances. You are penniless, darling. A kept man. You cannot afford this house, let alone my companionship." "You are leaving me because I cannot pay your bills?" Alfred asked, the brutal reality of his world shattering around him. "I am an expensive habit, Alfred. And you," she smiled thinly, stepping past him, "are no longer a man of means. Do give my regards to your terrifying new wife." Alfred returned to Westmore House, utterly hollowed out. In the span of 3 days, his pride, his autonomy, and his illusions about the loyalties of his society had been dismantled. He found Celeste in the grand drawing room, holding court. She had not retreated to the country as he had originally planned. Instead, she had seized London by the throat. Within a fortnight, the Yorkshire ghost became the undisputed diamond of the season. Her beauty, combined with her sharp wit and unimaginable wealth, made her the most sought-after hostess in the empire. Even His Royal Highness, Prince Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, attended her inaugural ball. Bertie was charmed by her lack of sycophancy, While other women fawned over the royal, Celeste discussed the geopolitical ramifications of the Suez Canal with him, matching him intellect for intellect. Alfred watched this from the shadows of his own ballroom. He watched the men of the ton, men who had mocked him for marrying a provincial spinster, now staring at his wife with naked, ravenous hunger. He watched Henry Cavendish fetch her champagne, looking thoroughly bewitched. And Alfred realized, with a sickening jolt of despair, that he was madly, desperately in love with her. He loved the way she commanded a room. He loved the ruthless efficiency with which she managed the estate ledgers, easily doubling their projected income by firing corrupt managers Alfred had ignored for years. He even loved the cold, polite disdain she reserved exclusively for him. He tried to woo her. He bought her diamonds using the meager allowance she permitted him, but she left them in their velvet boxes on the hallway credenza. He sent her rare orchids, which she promptly instructed the servants to donate to a local hospital. "You cannot buy my regard, Alfred," she told him one evening, catching him lingering outside her bedchamber door. They had not shared a bed. She had claimed the primary suite, relegating him to the guest quarters. "You established the terms of this arrangement. A business transaction. I am merely executing the contract." "I was a fool, Celeste," he pleaded, his voice cracking, stripping away the last remnants of his ducal pride. "I was arrogant, and I was terrified of failing my family's legacy. I lashed out at you because you represented my own weakness. Please, give me a chance to show you the man I can be." Celeste looked at him, her gray eyes unreadable. "Men do not change, Your Grace. They only adapt when their survival requires it. Good night." 6 months bled into a bitter, frostbitten November. The silent war within Westmore House remained an icy stalemate. Alfred had abandoned his gentlemen's clubs and his costly vices, instead burying himself in the estate library, painstakingly mastering the ledgers in a desperate bid to earn a single nod of respect from his wife. Then, the yellow envelope arrived. They were seated at opposite ends of the vast mahogany breakfast table when the butler presented it on a silver tray. Celeste tore the telegram open. Alfred watched the color vanish from her lips, her teacup rattling violently against the saucer before she abandoned it altogether. "It is Newcastle," she breathed, her voice fracturing. "A boiler collapse at the primary steel foundry. Dozens of men are trapped beneath the rubble. The workers are terrified and rioting against the management." She stood, her chair scraping harshly against the floorboards. "Those are my father's people. I must go." "We are going," Alfred corrected, immediately pushing back his own chair. "Alfred, no. It is a violent labor strike. A duke stepping out of a carriage in a silk waistcoat will only incite them further." "You are my wife," he stated, his tone brooking absolutely no argument. "What is yours, I protect. I will have the carriage readied." The journey north was a grueling, soot-stained blur of anxiety. When they finally reached the Newcastle foundries, the sky was choked with thick, acrid smoke that blotted out the afternoon sun. The yard was a hellscape of twisted iron, roaring flames, and hundreds of furious, desperate men wielding iron bars. The local magistrate cowered behind a thin, trembling line of constables, completely overwhelmed. As the Westmore carriage rolled to a halt, the crowd turned, their soot-darkened eyes catching the aristocratic crest painted on the doors. Angry shouts erupted, and stones were lifted from the dirt. Alfred did not wait for his footman to open the door. He kicked it open himself and stepped out into the freezing, ash-filled air. He ignored the jeers and the threat of violence. He strode directly toward a soot-covered foreman who was frantically trying to organize a bucket line. "Where is the structural collapse?" Alfred roared, his commanding voice cutting straight through the pandemonium. The foreman blinked, taken aback by the impeccably dressed nobleman stepping into the fray. "The east boiler room, Your Grace." The roof gave way. "There are boys trapped in the lower pit, but the iron beams are buckling. It's suicide to go down there." Alfred turned to look at Celeste, who had stepped onto the carriage runner, her gray eyes wide with sudden terror. "Stay here," he ordered. Before she could speak, Alfred stripped off his tailored morning coat, his silver waistcoat, and his silk cravat, tossing them carelessly into the mud. He rolled up his pristine white shirt sleeves, grabbed a heavy iron pry bar from a discarded cart, and plunged into the smoking ruins. Celeste stood frozen, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs as she watched the arrogant, pampered Duke of Westmore vanish into the inferno. For 3 grueling hours, Alfred worked in the belly of the beast. He hauled scalding bricks with bare, blistering hands. He threw his entire weight against a collapsed steel joist, his muscles screaming under the impossible strain, leveraging it just enough for 3 weeping apprentices to crawl out of the crushed pit. He worked side by side with the very men who had been ready to drag him from his carriage an hour prior, his face blackened with soot, his lungs burning with smoke. Just as dusk painted the sky a bruised purple, a sickening crack echoed across the yard. A secondary collapse shuddered through the weakened brickwork. "Alfred!" Celeste screamed, lunging forward, but the foreman caught her waist, dragging her back from the edge of the pit. A suffocating cloud of dust swallowed the wreckage entirely. A terrifying, heavy silence fell over the yard. Then, a figure emerged from the smoke. Alfred staggered forward, coughing violently, a young boy draped over his shoulder. He handed the child to a sobbing woman, took one unsteady step toward Celeste, and his knees gave out. A massive piece of falling masonry had struck his shoulder during the aftershock, searing a deep, jagged wound down his back. Celeste broke free from the foreman, dropping to her knees in the wet, black mud. She pulled his head into her lap, heedless of the dirt ruining her expensive silk traveling gown. "Alfred," she sobbed, her tears cutting clean tracks through the thick grime on his face. "You absolute fool." He forced a weak, bloodied smile, his vision swimming. "Told you. I am not a coward, Celeste." He lost consciousness before she could reply. He awoke to the smell of lavender and burning peat. Alfred opened his eyes to find himself in the master bedroom of the Harrington estate in Yorkshire. His shoulder was tightly bound, a dull, throbbing agony radiating down his arm with every beat of his heart. Celeste sat in a high-backed chair by the hearth. She wore a simple, unadorned muslin gown, her glorious auburn hair falling loose over her shoulders. She looked exhausted, the shadows under her eyes deep. Yet to him, she had never looked more magnificent. "You are awake," she whispered, rising quickly to pour him a glass of water from the bedside pitcher. Her touch, as she slipped her hand behind his neck to support him, was infinitely gentle. "The men?" he rasped, his throat raw from the smoke. "Safe," she replied, a single tear escaping to slide down her cheek. "All of them, because of you. They are calling you the Iron Duke in the taverns." Alfred looked down at his bandaged hands, shame washing over him. "Celeste, I nearly died in that rubble, and as the roof came down, my only thought, my greatest, most agonizing regret, was that I would leave this earth without ever truly earning your forgiveness." He swallowed hard, laying his fractured pride completely bare. "When I am healed, I will return to London. I will give you the country estates, full control of the funds, and a quiet separation. You saved my family's legacy. It is time I gave you your freedom from the misery I caused." Silence stretched between them, heavy and absolute, save for the crackle of the fire. Then, slowly, Celeste sat on the edge of the mattress. She reached out, her cool fingers lightly tracing the bruised line of his jaw. "I spent 6 long months in this very house, building an armor of absolute ice to survive the monster I thought you were," she murmured softly. "But the man who ran into that fire without a second thought, the man who bled for my people, I do not want freedom from him." She leaned down, the intoxicating scent of jasmine washing over him like a lifeline. "I want my husband." When her lips met his, the ice finally shattered. It was a kiss of fire and desperate redemption, the final sealing of a bargain that had cost them their pride, only to give them the world. If you love this story of pride, redemption, and a fiercely intelligent duchess bringing her duke to his knees, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments Which twist surprised you the most? Don't forget to share this historical drama with your fellow romance readers and subscribe to the channel for more sweeping, epic tales of love and betrayal. See you in the next story.